I find it really rewarding treating mental health patients just because it's something that they've been more than likely dealing with for a very long time, and they don't get a lot of grace from the world. Even if like you aren't sure about whether or not this is something that's causing a real problem in your life, like just do it, because where it snowballs and grows and grows and grows, it's your overall well-being. And if you're not taking care of yourself, you're not taking care of yourself.
Welcome to Drive, the podcast for truck drivers who are looking to enhance their lives both on and off the road, and for carriers looking for that perfect fit trucker. I'm Zac Ells.
And I'm Chelsea Faulkner.
And we're here to bring you conversations that will help keep you moving forward in every area of your life. Whether you're a seasoned trucker or just starting out in the industry, this is a show for you. Welcome back to Drive. Season 5, we're going to start off the very first episode with a super important discussion on mental health. This is probably the most important topic in the logistics trucking industry. I can't honestly think of, off the top of my head, anyone that really talks about this outside of maybe a podcast here or there. So to start this new season out right, we want to get a really good topic. We've got Scott Busby with Praesum Health. He's the director of admissions with Praesum Health, and one of their main focuses is getting people the help that they need in the space of addiction and counseling and anything in the mental health space. So we're excited to have Chelsea. She's joining us again. Chelsea, welcome back to co-hosting for another season.
Hey guys, thanks Zac for that introduction. And oh my gosh, that conversation was so heavy, but it was so good. And I feel like there was so many different points that we hit that were just huge for not only mental health as a whole, but this industry. And Zac, what were your thoughts on how he specifically hit on how Praesum Health is really bringing those services specifically to the trucking industry?
When you think about the mental health aspect to the trucking industry, a lot of times it gets skirted over. People don't want to talk about it. It makes sense. You're dealing with safety sensitivity, people's own personal things. But the one thing that I noticed that was really neat about what Scott and his group are doing is, instantly you can communicate with them. You can call his phone number. We're going to put that live on the podcast for you. You can get in contact with him before, if you're having a bad day or, you're going through something. We're all people. We go through things. People pass away. There may be issues at home. There may be financial issues. There may be different things going on. You can call this phone number. This information is private. It's secure. It's confidential. You can talk to someone who cares about you. And I think in this industry, in the trucking industry alone, people don't often seem to be empathetic or sympathetic to someone that's having a bad day because there's so much focus on making it on time, getting there safely, doing the right thing. We need to be doing the right thing by the people that are transporting our products and commodities.
Coming from, working in the trucking industry now for the last 4 years, you go from anything from those mom and pop companies to the larger corporations. And one of the biggest barriers with some of our drivers in reaching out for some of that help is that fear. And how do I talk to my company? What did you think about some of the solutions that his company is providing for those truck drivers who are needing help?
They're doing an amazing job. I mean, if you just listen to some of the things that Scott's talking about, whether he's got different groups for people that are dealing with substance abuse, different groups for people that are dealing with other issues like mental health, and suicide. These thoughts that are coming into our heads, they're not being harnessed. They're not being controlled. And so what Scott's group is really good at is helping you identify, understand that you're going through this. You're not walking alone. You're not some outlier that's out here on the edge, but you're in a group. Probably one of the reasons why you're not hearing more about this in our industry is because a lot of these topics that drivers are dealing with are relatable to people that own the companies, people that are running the companies, people that are at the upper echelons and the lower echelons of the business. The playing field is equal when it comes to what we're dealing with. The way we play the field is not equal. And I think that Scott's group is trying to level that out for us.
And some of the stories that he was sharing about some of the drivers and some of the people that he's worked with overall, I mean, it gave me goosebumps. What about you?
Every year I go to the Indy 500. Every time I watch a baseball game, a basketball game, I get goosebumps when I hear the national anthem, the Star Spangled Banner. To me, that's a memory from growing up and just being excited to be at an event with my dad or friends or family, whatever you're at. So sitting here, not hearing people talk about this as much as they could and just talking to you about this, I'm getting the goosebumps too. And I don't know about you, Chelsea, but I can't wait to have more of these conversations because I think that there's an area that's underserved and there's a community that's underserved. And that's one of the things that when we decided to put this podcast out there, I wanted to highlight not only the success of what truck drivers are doing, but the things that they struggle with, because nobody gets to successful without failing or having hit some kind of like rock bottom that could be different depending on what personality and what your background is and where you come from and actually where you are, because it's not where you're from really or where you're going. Sometimes it's always almost exclusively where you're at in this world.
Absolutely. Well, enough banter back and forth about it. Let's get into the conversation and let our listeners hear a little bit more about what we got to talk about.
Well, let's kick it off. Scott, thanks for coming on today.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me. It's an honor to kind of pop in here and hopefully help to shed some light on a topic that at the end of the day is life-changing for people. And that life change can be, I feel a little bit better in my everyday life and I've got a few new routines that are working for me, or it can be a total change, turning your life all the way around. It depends on where you're at kind of in that journey and what it looks like for you at the time, but it's a very rewarding thing. One of my favorite ways to look at it is really to look at it as like the socioeconomic class of the individuals that are needing the help. And it is different depending on what jobs people have, what kind of treatment is going to support them best. So I think it's a great topic. I think it's really awesome that you guys are out here talking about this, especially with all of the touches that you get with, you know, all these individual people that might not know that they have a lot of resources available to them.
Scott, when we first met here recently, we were introduced by some folks that we work with quite a bit, and it just seemed like we made a really good connection. The driving world is such a wild industry because truck drivers have one of the most unique positions that's out there where they're engaging with the public every single day, almost by themselves, kind of like in an echo chamber, almost a vacuum. So you can only imagine when I drive anywhere for any distance of time, I start having my own thoughts, and those can kind of aggregate and kind of incept into something. You can conceive things outside of that that are like sometimes will blow your own mind, but then also you have feelings and thoughts and emotions, like all these things that make us up as people. And then your job, you have to deal with these folks that are out there on the road that really don't care about anybody but themselves. And then most of the time you're getting this negative critical feedback, which is important to get. But when the majority of what you're hearing, you know, we see this every day in the news. If you pay attention to the news, I can't watch more than a few minutes of it a day. I want to kind of lay out that picture for you. And I know that you deal with people that drive in all the industries. So first, let's kind of tell us a little bit about Praesum Health and services you guys do.
I'll just kind of caveat the end of what you were saying there with 100,000%. Like there are different lifestyles that lead to different issues, lead to different solutions. A lot of times they're running parallel. It's not like they're wildly different, but trucking is definitely one of them with the kind of unique travel aspect that goes into it and the solitude because you are alone for so much of the time. But who am I? So yeah, I am the admissions director at Praesum Healthcare. I've been with the organization now for about 8 years and loved every minute of it. I came from more of a like primary substance abuse background where we were really only dealing with individuals who had substance abuse issues. And then once we kind of transitioned over here, it became both substance abuse and primary mental health, which is really cool. I find it really rewarding talking and treating mental health patients just because it's something that they've been more than likely dealing with for a very long time, and they don't get a lot of grace from the world, definitely. But even, you know, the wrong kind of provider that might not necessarily know how to deal with what they have going on. So aside from that too, just being able to kind of offer every level of care and service for the behavioral health field is pretty cool. So what allows us to provide all those services is we have 33 different programs up and down the East Coast, ranging all the way from, you know, that acute inpatient level all the way down to like routine outpatient and medication management. The other kind of piece that I think is important here, and I'm sure it affected the trucking industry too, was COVID. Like COVID did change a lot of things about the way that our industry works as well and fragmented a lot of it. But the one piece that really, really helped and is relevant to the conversation that we have today is the telehealth piece and kind of the explosion that's occurred there. More to be revealed on that, but that's kind of just the general background of Praesum. We really believe in detox with dignity was the slogan of our detox programs, and we carry that through all the way. We treat people with the respect that they deserve, whether or not they feel they deserve it at the time. And we give people chances. We'll continue to work with you as long as there's some form of willingness there, which for me, as someone who's also in recovery from substances, is huge. Again, when you start talking about employers, like there are some employers that are great about that. There are some that are awful about that, but neither are an excuse not to take action.
Coming from somebody who's worked in social work prior to being in this field, it's all near and dear to my heart, especially with the fact that there's not enough mental health services across the US for the amount of people that need it. And the fact that you guys are encompassing both the substance abuse and the mental health portions all into one is huge, because of the fact there's so many people out there that are self-medicating with the substances that are out there. So the fact that you guys are coming to them and saying, listen, I don't want you to be ashamed. I understand what you're doing. I understand that you're doing the best that you can with the tools that you have. Let me help you and show you how to do it better.
Exactly. And that's where it's like reading about something on the internet is not going to give you it's not black and white, and that's important to remember.
Speaking to the substance abuse part, I don't think there's a person out here that doesn't know somebody that's gone through. From the day I can remember going to a doctor's office, it seemed like there was always a fix for a prescription for something. And then it only makes sense that people, especially when they get locked down over COVID or something like that, would start looking inward to do some fixes, almost like a giant boat that was in the middle of a storm and you didn't know what was going to happen. So it only makes sense that you had a lot more exposure to some of these mental health issues, and substance abuse is just one of those issues, right?
Yeah, exactly. And substance abuse is a symptom of a problem. And there can be arguments made differently, but in my mind, it's a pretty logical fact. You're self-medicating for one reason or another. Are there differences between the people that are driven more by the mental health side than by their, substance abuse addiction? 100%. And that's another thing where like it's treated differently. So if you're going to go online and read about what you think you need to do to help yourself, maybe you're going to get some of it right, but you're not a professional. It's not easy for you to see. And if I go back and look at, let's just say, an argument I got in with my wife last week, it looks wildly different than what her side of that story would be. And we do the same thing with ourselves. It's really being able to have some sort of unbiased advice, opinion, anything to bounce off of in these things is huge. And that's where COVID initially was really doing that. I think people had some time on their hands that let's figure out what we can do for self-improvement. And some succeeded, some picked up some really cool new hobbies, and others, it's too much. It's a lot to deal with. So that isolation piece is key when you're really starting to do that, retract back from the world. And COVID did that for us, but it also hasn't necessarily fully gone away yet either. And that's where all these different treatment options come into play.
I feel like one of the other big conversations that nobody's really having that you kind of hit on just a little bit is the amount to which this conversation needs to be brought out to the employers and to be had with all of the different industries across all of business, just with the fact that, this is out there. Mental health and substance abuse do go hand in hand, and people do make mistakes. It's human nature. It's something that's going to happen. It's not necessarily something that we need to be putting people into this little box over. You can give people a second chance without giving them the farm. You can give people a second chance without telling them, hey, listen, I'm enabling you by telling you that you can keep your job. And instead, we can support people and make sure that they're going to be able to make better of themselves by making sure that they have the ability to access these resources at the end of the day. I think that's a conversation that's got to continue to be had.
The employer piece is such a big thing because, number one, it prevents people from getting treatment. not because of the employer, but because of the notion that that individual has in their head about what's getting back to the employer, especially when we're getting into the substance abuse realm. Mental health, a little less so, but we get probably 20 calls every day of someone saying, I want to come in, but I'm terrified of what to do with my job. It's really simple and you're protected. So walking people through like what that process looks like is really not all that difficult. And once they understand like, hey, this email blast isn't going to go out to the company saying that I'm going to drug rehab today and it's highly confidential. And if it did happen, then you're probably in for a nice little windfall on the back end lawsuit. So, it might work out for you. We treat about 1,500 patients a month throughout all of our different locations. 70% of them have jobs. It's not rare that this happens. And if you are able to deal with the HR department directly and just make sure like they want you to get help too. They don't want you to sit there and suffer and mess up. If you're using heroin and you're supposed to be going on a cross-country drive tomorrow, I think everybody would say, get off the heroin before we think about driving for 72 hours straight. It's really just a reframing thing with most individuals to understand like work is not an excuse most of the time. I'll give like a 5% chance where it is. And getting out of your own way and being honest and upfront with the ones that are safe to be honest and upfront with is what is going to make the difference there. So you get the moment of clarity and you're going strong and you're wanting to get the help, but it is a moment, most of the time. It's not like it's going to last for months and months and months of you planning to get some help, depending on the severity and the case of what's going on, obviously. But most of the time, it's the situation where you need to act quickly. So having information, even just to know, like, this is the general things I should say to my HR department. And you can say different things depending on how open you think the department is, or or don't know. Like if they're a very strict department and you're very concerned about what is getting back to them, all you have to do is request Family Medical Act leave, and it's an unspecified mental health disorder. Ideally, you're being honest with your employer because they do play a big role in your life. You should want them to understand where you're at and support you to the best of their ability as well. But obviously, we don't necessarily live in a perfect world. Most of employers are more than willing to get their people happy and healthy. And if that means sacrificing 2 to 4 weeks of work, then it's worth it. It's going to cost them more to find a replacement for you than that.
Scott, you probably talk to a lot of folks from all walks of life. I know that these types of things don't affect just one type, one group, one niche of person, whether it's a person swinging a hammer or somebody that's working in an HR department somewhere, or even doctors. I know that there's doctors and medical professionals that fall under the same stigma. One thing I found unique about Scott, your group is, I believe it's called Safe Harbor, a Facebook group that you have. What are some of these topics you're dealing with?
There's kind of a few different aspects of that group, which we launched about a year ago now, and really just to be a place where people can, number one, get some education, and number two, kind of be a part of a community that is supporting them, which if you were to kind of dig into that group a little bit deeper and see the majority of people that are kind of interacting and commenting, most of the time, like single people that are lonely. So this is giving them an opportunity to interact with people, which when you're depressed, which a lot of them are, is an extremely difficult thing to do in real life out in the world. It's kind of just a stopgap measure to kind of help get people to the next step. And if that person is not doing any sort of mental health work or treatment for themselves, it also then becomes, here's all the reasons why you should be doing that. For whatever reason, that group seems to skew a little bit older. A lot of people don't know how many resources are available to them now. Even if you're looking at 5 years ago trying to get a new psychiatrist appointment, you're looking at best case a week, worst case a month. It would be a $300 cash pay per session. That has changed a lot. Before COVID, it had started, but COVID is really what kind of drove that up to the next level there, because outpatient service all needed to move to virtual. there are pros and cons to each, and there are things that you don't get from virtual that you do get from in person. But it's huge for the people that are working every day, or they're a little bit further away than they need to be to get to the group. If you're a trucker and you're on the road, you don't have to miss anything. Like if you're in an IOP program and it's 3 nights a week, you can still do your 3 nights a week. You might just not do it from the office. We really try and emphasize a hybrid model. So you're coming in person for some services, the rest you are doing virtually. So mostly like we really like you to come in person for individual sessions and stuff like that, just because you do get a different experience sitting face to face with somebody. I know for myself, I do therapy sometimes virtually, and then other times I rotate week by week. And when I am in there, I do tend to fully give my attention to what's going on. But virtually, I can do the same thing, but sometimes it's just a little bit harder to engage. So really that kind of mix between the two, I think, is the ideal scenario, especially when you're dealing with people that are isolated, because that is like one of the top symptoms that we're battling against here. And for someone in the driving industry too, their job supports that as well to some degree, like you really do have to get involved in as many of these services as you can. And not even talking about actual therapy services, but just regular old support groups. If you're driving for a 10-hour day, you can get a different support group for every single hour that day. We've been really excited about how it's come together, because at this point, it's the community that's taking care of themselves. I am not going in there and commenting on people's posts and stuff like that very often. It's the other members of the group, which is really cool. And it helps the person that's giving the feedback as well. Helps them to get out of themselves and feel like they're doing something positive for another individual, which goes a really, really long way, and doesn't always seem like that. And it seems like such a simple thing.
Absolutely. It's so crazy how much technology nowadays has really more or less isolated us in and of itself. You think about truck drivers and how they're on the road and they're already isolated to start off with. And then you put technology in front of them. And now we're not even talking so much when we're at truck stops. Instead, it's all technology. We're getting all of our paperwork through our phones, through our emails. So we're not having those conversations face to face. So then to be able to have a community that's there for you and it's pre-built in. And so you already have somewhere to go to engage with other people who are like-minded, who may be having some of the same issues that you do, who are also isolated and having some of their own issues, and understand where you're coming from. That's huge.
1000%. So can I ask you guys a question?
Yes.
Go for it.
What would you say like the biggest challenges that drivers face in regards to kind of that mental health arena?
From my perspective, I feel like it could be a couple different things. I think the isolation part, people kind of tend to gravitate towards what they're used to and what they are. I mean, we're doing stuff at the age, the average driver gets started at 38. You know what I mean? It's almost like a second career on average. So you're already been programmed by the time you're before 10. So you're by this age, you're doing things just like on autopilot, right? That truck's not moving on autopilot, but you are. The industry, when I first got into it, was very disrespectful towards the driver, kind of like, you dumb driver. What do you think you're doing? Who do you think you are? Why do you think you're doing that? Did you follow Google Maps down off that bridge? So I think there's a respect category that you have a lot of egocentric. I don't know if ethnocentric. It's kind of getting a little bit there as well, because you do have a large group that's been migrating to the United States, and it's not just one particular group. You've got like groups that are different. You know how people are over time. They kind of go to where they're familiar. So there's a language barrier, but ultimately I think a lot of it comes down to just a respect level. Because if you're getting disrespected, that's just going to hit you to the core of what you are as a person. And so you're going to react to how you're programmed to be disrespected. Is it when you're growing up, your mom or dad said to hit back or to turn the other cheek? So there's all sorts of different issues that go into play there. But I think respect might be one of the biggest issues that I see.
That is a huge one too, because if you don't feel like you're getting the respect that you deserve, you are now hyper-analyzing every other interaction that goes on there. And that's really, that blow up is scary, like that's where you have somebody who is a relatively calm, cool demeanor that you've known for a little while blow up, and it certainly happens. Just ask my wife.
I think that
It's a lot. The isolation piece and the work schedule are the two that kind of spoke the most to me. But one thing I didn't think about until right now, actually, what the future of the industry looks like and where jobs are. So, like, is job security something that is a concern as well?
I think it's something that is concerning a lot of drivers right now, especially with the autonomous trucks coming into light, because there's a lot of drivers that are saying, okay, well, wait a second, they're coming out. What does that mean for me? If we've got vehicles that are going to be driving themselves, is that going to take my job? But then when you actually start to step back and take a look at what those autonomous trucks can do and the fact that they're still going to have those drivers behind the wheel of trucks on the road in order to make that entire concept work, it's something that the drivers get a breath of fresh air again. So they get to realize, okay, yes, it's threatening to a point, but when they actually sit down and they look at it, there's a lot of that anxiety that kind of breathes out and goes away.
That makes total sense. And I guess that's probably the case for just about anything. It's just looking at it a little bit differently. But that was one I just remember it was probably 2 years ago. And it was all the Canada stuff too, when they were doing all that. All of those things I think definitely impact mental health relatively severely, depending on kind of where you fall on the spectrum there, especially if you have any pre-existing conditions kind of coming into this. So for example, we treat a lot of drivers in our outpatient locations. And a lot of the times, if it is a substance abuse client, they do a detox quickly and they want to get right back out on the road. And one example we have, I can't name names, but he had come in to our Florida location 3 times in a year for detox. The fourth time he was in jeopardy of losing his job. And those first 3 times he did 5 days right back out. So really wasn't giving himself a lot of time to level out. And when you're in a detox, you're also on medications throughout that entire stay. He was on a benzodiazepine until the day he walked out. Not a high dose, obviously, but not setting yourself up for success, and just refused point blank to let us help him find any kind of aftercare, even an outpatient. He just wasn't interested in doing it. And that wasted 6 years of his life. Not total waste. I'm not saying that nothing good happened there. Very well might have been, but it took him 6 years to come back in again for the fourth stay, where he stayed for 90 days. And it's now been a year and a half, and it's the longest time he's had sober ever. So it's the persistence thing, it's an intention thing, but it is also listening to other people. We tell ourselves things in our own heads that are often not true,
I always think about, like, if you listen to that narrator in your head all the time, that guy or that gal's prejudice, and they don't always know what's good for you. They're selfish. They're ambitiously selfish. And I think that kind of digging at the a root issue, society's kind of shifted, especially with things being automated. If you remember back in the 90s, you'd go to these grocery stores back when people would just go to grocery stores and check out, and you would see tabloids. And the tabloids always had these wild stories. Basically, we live in an age where information is so accessible, it's hard to determine what's real and what's not, because this isn't like a medical journal. This isn't peer reviewed document. So now you have an era where, like Chelsea was talking about, the automated trucks, but you have people getting information. It's like the grapevine, the telephone game exponential. So people that don't know, they get fearful. And then, of course, our mainstream media that used to be, they make their money on advertisements and what gets things to sell. So one of the cool things that I see happening, speaking about the future, is that you're getting more platforms that are not just ABC or CBS or a corporate platform, I guess is the best way to put that. Not to disenfranchise one of those, because I'm certain that there's some good people at all places, but you're not getting any sort of pushback. We saw a lot of that in the political world, but you're only getting like one side that someone's trying to sell to you. Well, what happens if you type in on the internet, is coffee good for my eyes? You get like all these links to how it is, or if is it bad for my eyes? Well, yeah, you can find those too. So you have people in this world that are afraid. And in the trucking world in particular, if you have one bad day, you might lose your career. If you're already dangling by a thread in a financial world or in a relationship, you might not have a relationship with your kids, but graduation time, we're talking about that kind of stuff. So there's just a little bit that could just push you over the edge. And our employers and our community and our friends and our churches, you should be comfortable to talk to someone, to let them catch you in that safety net before that you just fall right through it without a parachute on.
Yeah. Because the kind of generally accepted notion for a long time has been you have to hit your bottom, quote unquote. While I don't disagree with that, everybody's bottom looks a whole lot different. If it's not being looked at and addressed, you can only stuff it down for so long. And then at some point, it will pop out with a vengeance. If you're thinking about what you're doing and you're intentional about your actions, that you can get just the same, if not better treatment than the rest of the population. There are lots of options. And because there are so many options and so many programs have opened, it's created a lot of competition within that industry, which leads to people doing things a little bit differently, which is like 5 years ago, if you were trying to get somebody placed in a program that had a Medicare or Medicaid policy, it was going to be a very difficult task. And at the end of the day, it would probably be like, hey, go show up at this place at 5 a.m. and hope that you're the first person in line to get a bed. On the inpatient side, that still exists to some degree. But on the outpatient side, there are so many providers that will take just about any insurance that you have and see you just about anywhere that you are. So even if like you aren't sure about whether or not this is something that's causing a real problem in your life, like just do it, because where it snowballs and grows and grows and grows, it's your overall well-being. And if you're not taking care of yourself, you're not taking care of yourself.
I'm going to back up for 2 seconds because you were talking about this driver who has now been 1.5 years sober. To hear that from a driver's perspective is absolutely huge for me because you're talking about, one, him living in isolation on the road. Two, his people, places, things are constantly going to be changing because he's constantly going to be out and about in all of these areas. So that speaks to how inclusive you guys' services are at this point and how much you guys have the ability to provide to those drivers with the fact that he's been 1.5 years sober when he finally decided to, engage in some of those aftercare services. Because to be able to maintain sobriety for 1.5 years when your people, places, things are changing that constantly, that's crazy amazing. So kudos to him and kudos to you guys as well, because that's huge.
Yeah. We see a pretty large contingency in our outpatient programs as well. On the mental health side, a lot of it's just medication management, but it's because they did start with in-person services and got stabilized and are now in a place where it's not the same issue that it was then. Do they still need some support? Do they still need some accountability and some check-ins and, like prescriptions and stuff along those lines? Yeah, we all do. It's not a far stretch to think that it can be done well, especially now with the telehealth edition.
I have these questions in my mind. How do we break down mental health stigmas? How do we do things? Because like everybody's talking about AI. It's like the greatest thing since sliced bread. But like you also have HIPAA. So like you can't just like throw a group of messages into like a platform somewhere. Somebody's got to automate that. But blockchain could be used for security features. Like if somebody may be prompted to do something that they're familiar with, like Chelsea was mentioning, people, places that change, right? That's a big trigger for people. How are we able to break some of these things down using some of this technology that we currently, it's like the Wild West of it, without people feeling like their employer's going to know? I mean, your spouse, at some point, you're going to want to share this with them because that's very important. But knowing from firsthand experience how that works, seeing it, like that's a very touchy area. So how can we utilize some of this stuff? And how do you see that transforming this industry in the mental health side of things? Because no one wants their employer to know until it's time to know. It's like they're playing poker, but you can't play poker with your life. And so that, to me, in this industry, is something that is a need. I'm not going to say gone unaddressed, but when you have lawyers involved, it makes things so difficult.
Yeah, and they are often, especially when you're starting dealing with employment cases that they didn't get the permission to miss or whatever the case, was there. So that's huge. I can't understate the amount that tech has played in giving us an opportunity to provide better patient care over the last 2 years, over the last 4 years, over the last 5 years. I mean, there's just been so many different things that have come out that make patient care easier, and like help to increase all of those touch points so that they know what's going on everywhere, wherever they're at in the admission process there. So in regards to how we use it now and like probably what I feel to be the coolest application. So we do about 1,500 admissions a month. We've been open for 20 years. Obviously, that number didn't start at 1,500. It's scaled over time, but we have a lot of data. And what we're able to do with AI now is to like literally plug in all of those assessments into a program and let it kind of aggregate that data and identify patterns. So that way, when Zac, you're coming in for your intake and you answered, these questions pretty identically to Chelsea, other than maybe male, female, that's going to get taken into consideration when we're looking at what your individualized treatment plan is going to look like. But the other piece that I thought of when you're talking about that too is the employer piece is it's the stigma, and the stigma has gotten much better over the last 10 years, really. Go talk to your grandfather and ask him how he would treat depression. Mine would tell me to go chop some firewood, which, serves its purpose too. I'm not going to say it doesn't, but most of the older population and even some of the, younger as you're going through, they get colored by previous notions of what things were. And it's a shame that it's like that, but it's also really, really great that at this point and where we stand in this country, if you walk out into a crowded room and say, I have depression or I have an alcoholic or whatever it is, no one's really going to care. And if they care, it's because there's some parts of themselves that they're not so happy about either. We can probably have a conversation with them about getting some help too. I don't think that people realize that the stigma has gotten better, especially from an employer perspective. Like, your HR department, God willing, should be pretty well up to date on kind of how to handle these scenarios. We personally, like at our company, work with 5 or 6 large organizations that they send them to us when they get identified. And they found that if there's any bit of kind of red flag, they approach and ask and kind of start that process off, which makes a really big difference for people, I think, in the end. So that's one that we've kind of passed along to other either EAPs or employers that we've talked to. Number one, because, that moment of clarity piece, you got to strike while the iron's hot. And number two, if you communicate well with that group, they don't want to do that work. It's not necessarily their expertise. So being able to partner with organizations like that really help to kind of close the loop and make sure that everything's getting taken care of and informing the individual in the end that, this is not what it was 5 years ago.
Do you guys provide services to help your clients have those conversations with their companies that they work with?
Yeah, that's a major part of care here, especially on the inpatient level, obviously, because you're not at work. But 65 to 70% of our patients do have jobs. They're not the ones that are communicating with those jobs once they come in the door. It's us. So we're very well versed in getting all the, proper paperwork lined up and getting all that set. We really take pride in the fact that we can help to close the gap with them and also educate them, because if you walk in and say, hey, I'm struggling with a pill addiction, you might not be able to kind of give enough context as to the driving factors behind that as a doctor can.
Well, and in the trucking world, truckers are different. They got a different DNA. They get it done, right? So when you're in an industry and we talk, blue collar, no collar, but when you're in an industry where you have to perform to get it done, you're running this route, but wait a minute, that route's running you. And I think one thing that companies in the logistics world could do, instead of just asking someone, hey, how was your sleep last night before they come into work, because it's a safety sensitive job, they could get into more things with them that doesn't have to touch a sensitive area, but can cause the driver to think, am I compartmentalizing my behavior? And I think this speaks to taking personal inventory, Scott. What do you think?
Yeah, 100%. I had my own struggles, one of them being substances. And like a big part of the recovery from that is a daily reflection journal, and it's simple. It doesn't have to be something that's crazy in depth or philosophical or anything. It's 10 questions. And having that as a tool to look back on for anybody is helpful. Like that's how you can see your patterns throughout the day. And you can tell, all right, well, typically I do all my chores on Thursday, and Thursday is the day that I feel like I don't want to be here anymore. So let's mix that up. Let's look at how we're doing things. And the one piece that I cannot emphasize enough here, don't do it by yourself. Because if you do, one of two things is going to happen. You're going to succeed, and it's going to take a really long time and a lot of trial and error, or you're going to fail and you're going to wind up exactly where you were before. And you're going to say, I don't want to do it anymore. It's a relatable feeling to anybody who's kind of gone through either, a significant mental health or substance abuse issue, what it takes to buy back in and start kind of going through that process again. It sucks. It's not fun for anybody. We all get used to our ways. And the sickest part of it is that a lot of the mental health patients, they miss the excitement of the mental health piece once they're medicated. Even if that's depression making them really sad and not wanting to get out of bed, that's the feelings that you are comfortable with. That's what you know. So without consulting with somebody professionally to really kind of get some unbiased eyes on the situation, and because services are so available right now, there's no excuse not to do it. Even if you were to try 3 sessions just to see what happens and get a professional opinion on where you stand with your problems. No one's immune to this. Everyone has seasons of these feelings. There's no shortage of reasons why this can happen. And because everybody is an individual person, getting that professional help, again, can't emphasize it enough.
Mental health is a topic so heavy it needs its own suspension. I mean, this is just something that it's always been something that's near and dear to me personally, but like we're just a group of people out here, and if you get down to the basics of it, we're just trying to figure out how to make this world work. And trucking is just one place to do that. And life is about more than the job that you do. But like, if people want to get more access to stuff like this, I know your Facebook group. What's the name of that Facebook group that you guys have going?
We have a few. There's one that's just for general mental health, so substance abuse and mental health combined. That is called Safe Harbor. And then we have another group that's specifically for substance abuse called Safe Space. Both do live streams every week. Every Monday night, we have one of our clinical professionals on to dive into a topic. Most of what we talk about is relatively general. It's just hopefully helpful to somebody who is just kind of starting this mental health journey. And then Safe Space is primary substance abuse. There's some mental health that gets wound up in there too. And the live streams on that one are more so like peer recovery based. So different people that have kind of gone through, whether it be our program or a different program, and have kind of come out the other side. And because it's private, you get an opportunity to have people speak like they actually want to.
Do you guys have any groups? Al-Anon is a group for people to go to when you have someone that's in recovery and you're not quite sure what their behavior is coming from.
We have a weekly parent support group, but you don't have to be a parent. You can be a spouse or a son or daughter or whatever. That runs, I believe right now it's on Wednesday nights. That does change sometimes. It's open to the public fully. We encourage everybody and anybody to come along. The more the merrier. I thank God every day that my parents went to one of those groups early on. That's why I'm here now. I had people that took an interest in what was going on with me. Within the trucking industry, where would you say the level of awareness is for these issues?
I think your younger generation truckers are more informed than your older generation truckers are. But the industry as a whole, I feel like we're still getting there. There's still a lot of work to be done.
Yeah, it's kind of skirted under the rug because you're dealing with people that are driving and safety sensitive. So, like, why would you highlight that and make it a problem if it's not right in front of your face? I think that's kind of an attitude that a lot of companies probably have. And not saying that it's right, but not knowing how to fix something. And that's the kind of conversation that if we could make any kind of impact on is it's almost like I talked to a guy one time that was fostering children. And he was like, take everything you know about raising a child when you're fostering them. And you got to throw it out the window because some of these kids come from areas when they were born, the chemicals that were being put into their mother were transforming the mind. So they're in survival mode, or they're in some kind of mode where it's not regular parenting is not going to work here. And you think you know what you're doing. It's not apples to apples. So I'd like to see employers and communities come together. What if we had a make-a-wish for people that had these issues? And maybe there are some that exist that I'm not aware of, but if it was a dream for me, I would think that that's where we would be with this kind of stuff. So we're not segregating and putting people out. You're keeping people safe. You're pulling the ones that are in the red or in the yellow, getting them out of the truck, getting them into some help, but then also showing people it's okay to say, I need some help here. Because that's something that if you're already on the fritz, you're not going to tell anybody because you might lose it all.
That's where the fear is, when in reality, it's more than likely going to bite you in the ass at some point in the future if you don't take care of it now. But with the employer piece too, it's the employers need to be trained. A lot of them, some are great and understand what they're doing and they took the time and effort to learn about the situation, and others don't, and they don't want to deal with it. But it's finding who is going to be that support for you that's going to make a really big difference.
Absolutely. And Scott, I feel like we could sit and talk about this for about 5 more episodes and still not be even touching the tip of the iceberg. But if we have drivers out there or people who are listening who want to find you specifically, where do they need to reach out to you? Is that going to be LinkedIn, or where is that you'd like them to find you?
So I have a LinkedIn page, which is just Scott Busby. My email is sbusby, Busby, at Praesum, Praesum, healthcare.com. And you can also call 561-884-3869 at any time, and that will get my desk phone. So always happy to help, even if it's just a point in the right direction. We have resources countrywide. We've been doing this for a very long time. Regardless of the insurance, doesn't matter. We'll be able to find something to kind of get you on the right path there. And that's kind of the attitude that we carry throughout our entire program. It was a driver who was prescribed painkillers because he was getting sore driving all day for the last 20 years. And that progressed him from 5 milligrams of Vicodin down to he's using heroin. And he's like 58 years old. You don't think that many people start using heroin at 58, but it does happen. If his previous providers had more of an understanding of what he was going through, and he also understood that, number one, this is how this medication works. Number two, it's not surprising that I don't feel great when I stop taking it. And number three, how am I going to be able to do this now without it? With any physically demanding job, you're doing a lot all day long. So I was just curious to know if that was something that you're seeing somewhat regularly or not.
We don't hear about that as much as we hear about a lot of the marijuana laws that are changing. There's state to state that are different levels of CBD that people are taking. I mean, we saw when there was this yellow bankruptcy or they shut down, we had drivers that were on stuff that were in Illinois and they didn't realize that they shouldn't have been taking it. They found out because they were trying to get another job. They hadn't gotten hit for random. So then this guy's in an SOP program and it was a cream, or it may have been something that they were doing, she or he were doing for pain management. So a lot of it comes down to pain management. And if people had an understanding of how the medication affected them and some lifestyle changes, most of my experiences at the doctor's office have been, take this pill, you'll be fine. There's not typically been an educational piece to it. And so if the medical industry was doing us a favor, they could kind of focus more on education as well at the same time with medication, so that we understand, why am I feeling like crap today? Why am I all of a sudden enraged and I don't know why? Or why am I all of a sudden feeling so lethargic? So if they could promote some more education on top of the medication, I think that it would do some wonders, and maybe start at a level that's more cellular from an education standpoint in high school. Teach these kids about what it looks like. We want to teach them how to be functional humans. We need to teach them how to be functional humans in our society, not the society that maybe the government wants them to be in. Scott, we appreciate this opportunity to sit down and talk to you. And obviously this topic is a big one, and we're excited to share this with the podcast. And hopefully we can do some more of these episodes with you, because there's so many things we could talk about. And this is, to me, is just the most important piece that's out there. you got to care for your soul. You can't just care for your body, right? And there's a lot more going on there. So thanks again, man. It's nice to meet you, and we appreciate you getting on the show and giving us your thoughts, because your thoughts, they mean a lot and they matter.
It was a pleasure, guys. Thank you so much for having me on, and I hope to do it again soon.
Thanks so much for joining us on this episode of Drive. For more from Handle Now, Chelsea, and myself, head to handlenow.com and sign up for our newsletter. You can also join our Facebook group called The Driver's Seat and follow us on LinkedIn. Don't forget to subscribe wherever you get your podcasts.